The wind screamed across Blackwater Cove like a banshee unleashed, dragging sheets of rain over the jagged cliffs and churning the sea into a frothing beast. It was just past midnight when the storm hit its peak, the kind of tempest that swallowed boats whole and left fishermen whispering prayers into the dark. By morning, the dock stood eerily silent, the air thick with salt and unease. Every slip held its vessel, lashed tight against the gale. Every slip but one. Ben Carver's boat, the Salty Dawn, bobbed alone at the pier. Its ropes slack, its deck empty. No sign of Ben, a grizzled fisherman whose weathered hands had hauled nets through worse squalls than this. Just gone. And then there was Storm. The rugged Husky sat at the dock's edge, his thick fur plastered wet against his frame, his ice-blue eyes fixed on the abandoned boat. He'd been Ben's shadow for a decade, 10 years of salt-crusted mornings and fish-scented nights. And now he howled, a mournful wail that cut through the wind's dying gasps. It wasn't a sound of grief, not quite. It was sharper, deeper, a cry that clawed at the soul of anyone close enough to hear. The dock workers noticed first, their oilskins dripping as they paused mid-task, staring at the dog who wouldn't move. "He's been at it since dawn," one muttered, shaking his head. "Ain't right." Mia Hale pulled her hood tighter against the drizzle, her boots thudding on the warped planks as she approached the pier. A rookie diver with a knack for puzzles, she'd moved to Blackwater Cove chasing quiet. Ironic, given the chaos she now faced. She'd seen the Salty Dawn swaying in the harbor light 100 times, Ben's gravelly laugh echoing from its helm. Now, the silence was deafening, broken only by Storm's relentless howls. She stopped short, her breath catching as the Husky turned his head, locking eyes with her. His gaze wasn't pleading, it was demanding, a call she couldn't shake. "Ben didn't come back," Old Pete rasped from the bait shack, his voice rough as the sea itself. He limped over, a thermos of coffee steaming in his gnarled hands. "Boat washed up at first light. No nets, no gear, no Ben. Storm was just sitting there, howling like the devil's own." Mia frowned, her eyes tracing the boat's hull, slick with rain and seaweed. "He wouldn't abandon her," she said, more to herself than Pete. "Not in a storm like that." Pete shrugged, his weathered face creasing. "Sea's a thief, girl. Takes what it wants." But Storm didn't agree. He surged to his feet, his claws scraping the dock as he lunged toward the boat, pawing at the hull with a frantic urgency that sent a shiver down Mia's spine. His howls sharpened, each one a dagger in the fog, and she felt it, a prickling certainty that this wasn't just loss. "What's he seeing?" she murmured, stepping closer. The Husky's ears twitched, his body taut as a bowstring, and he barked once, sharp and clear, his muzzle aimed at the boat's shadowed deck. The cove seemed to hold its breath, the waves lapping softer now as if listening. Mia's heart thudded against her ribs, her mind racing with questions she couldn't voice. Where was Ben? Why was the boat here, untouched by the storm's wrath when its captain wasn't? And what was Storm trying to tell her, his cries echoing like a beacon in the mist? The dock creaked beneath her, the wind whispering through the cliffs. And in that moment, she knew. This was no ordinary disappearance. Something dark lingered beneath the waves, and Storm was the key to finding it. The fog rolled in thicker over Blackwater Cove, cloaking the docks in a shroud that muffled sound and blurred edges. Mia Hale stood frozen on the pier, her eyes locked on Storm as the Husky pawed at the Salty Dawn's hull, his claws scraping splinters from the weathered wood. His howls had softened into low, insistent growls, each one vibrating through the damp air like a plea or a warning. The boat rocked gently against its moorings, its empty deck staring back like a hollow eye, and Mia felt the weight of its silence press against her chest. Ben Carver was gone, and Storm knew something she didn't. Footsteps thudded behind her, heavy and deliberate, breaking the spell. Jack Rollins, the harbormaster, loomed out of the mist, his broad frame cutting through the fog like a ship through waves. A skeptic with a face carved by decades of salt and sun, he'd run Blackwater's docks since before Mia was born. His gray eyes flicked from her to the Husky, narrowing as Storm's growls sharpened. "What's got you out here, Hale?" He rumbled, his voice rough as gravel. "Storm's making a racket. Folks are talking." Mia nodded toward the boat. "Ben's missing. That's not like him. And Storm. He's not just mourning. Jack snorted, crossing his arms over his oilskin coat. Dogs howl, fishermen drown. Ain't the first time the sea's claimed one of ours? But his gaze lingered on Storm, who now paced the dock's edge, his tail flicking with agitation. The husky stopped, nosing the hull again, then let out a bark so sharp it echoed off the cliffs, a sound that prickled the hairs on Mia's neck. Jack's skepticism faltered, his jaw tightening. He's been at it all morning, he admitted, softer now. Ain't eaten, ain't slept, just that damn boat. Mia stepped closer to the salty dawn, her boots slipping slightly on the wet planks. The hull gleamed with rain, its blue paint chipped and faded. But something about Storm's focus gnawed at her, a puzzle begging to be solved. He's trying to tell us something, she said, her voice steady despite the chill creeping up her spine. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold wood where Storm pawed, and felt a faint ridge, a seam barely visible under the grime. Her pulse quickened. Jack, look at this. The harbormaster lumbered over, squinting at the spot. What am I seeing? He grunted, but his tone shifted, curiosity edging out doubt. Mia traced the seam with her fingertip, her mind racing. It's not natural, too straight, like a hatch or a panel. Storm barked again, his ice blue eyes boring into her, and she met his gaze, a silent pact forming between them. Ben didn't just vanish, she said, louder now. Something happened out there, and it's still here. Jack rubbed his stubbled chin, the wind tugging at his coat. You're saying the boat's hiding something? His skepticism lingered, but his eyes darted to Storm, who sat back, tail thumping once as if urging them on. Mia nodded, her resolve hardening. I'm saying Storm knows more than we do. I need to dive. Check the wreck, the water, anything. Jack's brow furrowed, the weight of her words settling in. Sea's a mess after that storm, he warned. Dangerous, even for you. The cove's waves crashed harder now, a restless rhythm that mirrored Mia's heartbeat. She glanced at Storm, his fur bristling in the wind, his growls a steady undertone to the surf. The fog thickened, swallowing the cliffs, and the boat loomed larger, its secrets locked tight beneath the hull. I don't care, she said, her voice cutting through the haze. Ben's out there, or he was. And Storm's not letting this go, neither am I. Jack exhaled, a cloud of breath in the mist, and nodded once. All right, Hale, but you're not diving alone. The fog hung heavy over Blackwater Cove, a gray veil that swallowed the horizon and muted the world to whispers. Mia Hale stood on the dock beside the salty dawn, her wetsuit clinging cold against her skin, her dive gear slung over her shoulder like a soldier's pack. The wind had eased, but the sea growled beneath the pier, its waves slapping the pilings with a restless hunger. Storm paced at her feet, his rugged husky frame taut with purpose, his ice blue eyes darting between her and the boat. His growls had softened into a low, steady rumble, a sound that thrummed through the planks and into her bones, urging her toward the water. Jack Rollins loomed nearby, his oilskin coat dripping from the mist, his gray eyes scanning the boat with a mix of doubt and unease. You sure about this, Hale? He asked, his voice rough against the cove's quiet. Storm's got you spooked, but the sea's still churning. One wrong move, and it'll take you too. Mia tightened her mask strap, her fingers steady despite the chill creeping up her spine. I'm sure, she said, meeting his gaze. Ben wouldn't leave Storm, not willingly. That seam on the hull, it's a clue. I need to see what's down there. Storm barked, sharp and commanding, his claws scraping the dock as he nosed the boat's edge again. His insistence was a tether, pulling her deeper into the mystery, and she felt it, an ache of loyalty mirrored in her own resolve. Jack sighed, rubbing his stubbled jaw. Fine, but I'm coming with you. Got the skiff ready. Storm stays here, though. The husky's ears flattened, a low whine escaping his throat, and Mia knelt beside him, her hands sinking into his wet fur. You've done enough, boy, she murmured. Let me take it from here. Storm's eyes held hers, fierce and unyielding, and she wondered if he understood, or if he simply refused to let go. The skiff bobbed beside the pier, a weathered relic Jack had manned for years, its motor coughing to life with a sputter of exhaust. Mia climbed aboard, her gear clinking as she settled in, while Jack cast off, steering them into the cove's heart. The fog thickened, cloaking the cliffs in shadow, and the boat's silhouette faded behind them, Storm's growls a distant echo. "Where are you diving?" Jack asked, his hand steady on the wheel. Mia pointed to a spot just beyond the breakwater, where the water darkened to an inky black. "There," she said. "If Ben went down, that's where the currents would have pulled him." The sea rolled beneath them, its surface rippling like a living thing, and Mia's pulse quickened as she strapped on her tank. She'd dived these waters before, kelp forests, sunken nets, but never with this weight, this sense of something lurking beneath. Jack cut the engine, the skiff drifting in the silence, and she adjusted her regulator, her breath hissing through the mask. 10 minutes, Jack warned, his voice tight. "Then I'm hauling you up, currents or not." She nodded, slipping over the edge, and the cold swallowed her whole. The water closed in, a frigid embrace that pressed against her chest, the world above vanishing into a murky haze. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, catching glints of fish and swaying kelp, but her eyes searched for something else, wreckage, a sign, anything tied to the salty dawn. Bubbles trailed upward as she descended, the pressure building in her ears, and then she saw it, a shadow on the seabed, jagged and still, half buried in silt. Her heart thudded against her ribs, a drumbeat in the silence, and she kicked closer, the shape resolving into a boat's hull. Not Ben's, but something older, its wood splintered and barnacle-crusted. Storm's howls echoed in her mind, a call from above, and she knew. This was just the beginning. The ocean's depths pressed against Mia Hale like a living weight, its icy grip seeping through her wetsuit as she hovered above the sunken wreck. Her flashlight beam danced across the splintered hull, illuminating a skeleton of wood and rust, half claimed by the seabed's silt. Bubbles spiraled upward from her regulator, slow and deliberate, a lifeline to the world above, where Jack waited in the skiff, and Storm's howls still echoed in her mind. The cove's waters were a murky shroud, kelp swaying like ghostly fingers in the current. But this wreck, older than the salty dawn, its lines jagged and broken, held her gaze with a quiet menace. It wasn't Ben's boat, but it was something. She kicked closer, her fins stirring clouds of sediment that swirled in the beam's glow. The hull loomed larger now, its planks cracked and barnacle-encrusted, a relic of some forgotten storm. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, a steady counterpoint to the sea's muted roar, and she reached out, her gloved hand brushing the wood. It was cold, unnaturally so, and beneath the grime she glimpsed faded lettering, the gull's cry. Her breath hitched, the name tugging at a memory. A boat lost years ago, its crew vanished without a trace. Blackwater Cove had whispered tales of it, ghost stories swapped over whiskey, but here it was, real and sunken, a secret the sea had kept. Mia's light swept the wreck, searching for answers, and caught a glint, metal, sharp-edged, wedged between two planks. She pried at it with her dive knife, her fingers trembling as the silt cleared, revealing a rusted tin box, its lid sealed tight. Her heart leapt, a surge of adrenaline cutting through the cold, and she tugged it free, the weight of it solid in her hands. Storm's frantic pawing flashed in her mind, his focus on the hull, his growls a call she couldn't ignore. Whatever this was, it was tied to Ben, to the boat, to the Husky's unshakable vigil. She clutched the box to her chest, her fins kicking hard as she ascended, the wreck fading into the murk below. The surface broke with a gasp, her mask fogging as she hauled herself onto the skiff. Jack's hands gripped her arms, pulling her aboard, his gray eyes wide with a mix of relief and impatience. "What did you find, Hale?" he demanded, his voice rough over the wave's restless slap. Water streamed from her suit as she set the tin box between them, its rusted surface glinting in the fog-diffused dawn. "This," she said, her breath ragged. "From a wreck down there, the gull's cry. It's not Ben's, but it's connected. I can feel it." Jack's brow furrowed, his skepticism warring with curiosity as he studied the box. "That old ghost ship," he muttered, his tone laced with unease. "Folks said she went down in '09. Crew never found. You thinking Ben stumbled onto something like that?" Mia nodded, her fingers tracing the box's edge, her mind racing. Storm knew. He's been howling at that boat for a reason. This could be it. She pried at the lid, her dive knife scraping rust until it popped open with a groan, revealing a sodden logbook, its pages swollen but intact. The skiff rocked as Jack leaned in, the fog curling around them like a living thing. Mia peeled back the cover, her pulse spiking as ink bled across the paper. Dates, coordinates, names, scrawled in a shaky hand. One entry stood out, dated 3 days ago. "They're watching. Nets cut. No accident." Her throat tightened, the words a whisper from the deep. Ben's voice, or someone's, reaching through the wreck to warn them. The sea growled louder, the cliffs looming through the mist, and Mia met Jack's gaze, her resolve hardening. "He's alive," she said, her voice cutting through the haze. "And we're not stopping until we find him." The skiff sliced through the fog, its motor a low growl against the restless churn of Blackwater Cove. Mia Hale clutched the rusted tin box, the sodden logbook open in her lap, its inked words bleeding into the damp pages like wounds. "They're watching. Nets cut. No accident." The entry, dated 3 days ago, the night before the storm, burned in her mind, a lifeline to Ben Carver that pulsed with urgency. The sea stretched around them, a gray expanse veined with whitecaps, its surface hiding secrets she could feel but not yet name. Jack Rollins gripped the wheel, his gray eyes flicking between the horizon and the book, his skepticism cracking under the weight of what they had found. "This ain't no ghost story," Mia said, her voice steady despite the wind's bite. "Someone's out there, watching, cutting nets. Ben knew it, and that's why he's gone." Jack's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening on the wheel. "You're saying he didn't drown?" he asked, his tone rough but tinged with doubt. "That wreck, the gull's cry. It's been down there a decade. What's it got to do with him?" Mia traced the logbook's shaky scrawl, her fingers trembling from cold and adrenaline. "It's a pattern," she said. "Something's been happening in these waters, something Ben stumbled into, and Storm's been trying to tell us." The dock loomed through the mist, the salty dawn swaying at its moorings, a silent witness to the unfolding truth. Storm's howls greeted them before the skiff even touched the pier, a mournful wail that shivered through the fog and straight into Mia's chest. She leapt onto the planks, her boots slipping as she ran to the Husky, the tin box still clutched tight. Storm surged toward her, his ice blue eyes blazing, his wet fur brushing her legs as he nosed the box with a frantic whine. "You knew, didn't you?" she murmured, kneeling to meet his gaze. His tail thumped once, a flicker of relief, and she felt it, an unshakable bond tying them to Ben, wherever he was. Jack tied off the skiff, his heavy steps echoing as he joined them. "Dog's smarter than half this town," he muttered, his voice softer now, almost reverent. He peered at the logbook over Mia's shoulder, his brow furrowing deeper. "Coordinates here, off the North Shoals. That's where Ben fished last." Mia's heart leapt, a spark of hope igniting in the haze. "Then that's where we start," she said, standing, her resolve a steel thread through the cold. "He's alive, Jack." "I know it." The harbormaster rubbed his stubbled chin, the wind tugging at his coat. "If you're right, Hale, we're poking a hornet's nest," he warned. "Whoever they are, they don't want this found." His eyes darted to the sea, where the fog swirled thicker, cloaking the cliffs in shadow. Mia nodded, her mind racing. "Let them come," she said, her voice cutting through the mist. "Storm's not giving up, and neither are we." The Husky barked, sharp and clear, his ears pricked as if he understood. And Jack's skepticism finally broke, replaced by a grim nod. "All right, I'll radio the Coast Guard. Get a boat ready, but we're not diving blind again." The cove's air grew heavier, the waves crashing with a rhythm that felt alive, insistent. Mia flipped through the logbook, her flashlight beam catching more entries. Dates stretching back months, notes of shadow boats, and cut lines. A fisherman's quiet record of something sinister. Storm pressed close, his growl a low undertone, and she felt the weight of his trust, his loyalty a beacon in the dark. The cliffs loomed like sentinels, their jagged edges swallowed by fog, and the sea whispered back, its secrets stirring beneath the surface. Ben was out there, alive or not, and whatever they were, they'd underestimated the Husky's howl. Mia tightened her grip on the book, her breath clouding in the chill, and knew the storm wasn't over yet. The fog clung to Blackwater Cove like a shroud, its tendrils curling around the docks and softening the world to a dreamlike haze. Mia Hale stood beside the salty dawn, the logbook tucked under her arm, its damp pages a silent testament to Ben Carver's fate. The sea growled beyond the breakwater, its waves a restless drumbeat against the cliffs, and the air tasted of salt and secrets. Storm sat at her feet, his rugged husky frame still as stone, his ice-blue eyes fixed on the horizon where the North Shoals lay hidden in mist. His growls had faded, replaced by a quiet intensity that thrummed through the planks, a promise he wouldn't break. Jack Rollins paced the pier, his radio crackling with static as he barked orders to the Coast Guard. "Need a cutter out by the shoals, full sweep, lights on," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Something's off out there, and we've got a man missing." The reply buzzed through, clipped and formal, promising a boat within the hour. Jack clipped the radio to his belt, his gray eyes meeting Mia's with a flicker of resolve. "They're coming," he said, "but it's a damn fool's errand without more to go on. You sure about them coordinates?" Mia nodded, tapping the logbook. Ben marked them himself. That's where he was, where he saw them. Storm's ears twitched, his head tilting as if he heard something beyond the waves' roar, a sound Mia couldn't catch. She knelt beside him, her hand sinking into his wet fur, and felt the tremor of his focus, a thread tying them to the shoals. "You've been right all along, haven't you?" she murmured, her voice soft against the wind. The husky's tail thumped once, his gaze unwavering, and she drew strength from it, a quiet fire stoked by his loyalty. Ben was out there, she could feel it in her bones, a certainty mirrored in Storm's unyielding vigil. The harbormaster's skiff rocked nearby, its hull gleaming with fresh rain, and Jack gestured toward it. "We'll take her out. Meet the cutter halfway, quite," he said. "Storm comes too. If he's got a nose for this, I ain't leaving him behind." Mia straightened, a spark of gratitude warming the chill in her chest. "Good," she said. "He's our compass." She climbed aboard, Storm leaping after her with a grace that belied his rugged frame, his claws clicking on the deck. Jack cast off, the motor sputtering to life, and the skiff pushed into the cove, the fog swallowing the docks behind them. The water darkened as they neared the shoals, its surface rippling with unseen currents, a restless beast beneath the mist. Mia's flashlight swept the logbook, her eyes tracing Ben's scrawl. "Shadow boats. No lights. Nets gone by dawn." The words painted a picture of stealth and menace, a threat lurking just beyond sight. "Pirates," she muttered, the realization sinking in like a stone. "They've been hitting fishermen, taking gear, maybe more." Jack's grip tightened on the wheel, his face hardening. "If that's true, Ben saw too much, I think," he said. "And they didn't let him sail home." A distant hum cut through the fog. The Coast Guard cutter, its lights piercing the haze like twin beacons. But before Mia could signal, Storm surged to the skiff's edge, his growl rumbling low and fierce, his ears flat against his head. His muzzle pointed north, past the cutter, toward a shadow in the mist, a shape too sharp, too fast, cutting through the waves. Mia's breath caught, her pulse spiking as the shadow vanished, swallowed by the fog. "You see that?" she hissed, her voice tight. Jack nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Something's out there, moving quick, too quick." The sea growled louder, the shoals looming closer, and Storm's growl deepened, a warning etched in fur and fang. The fog pulsed around them, alive with secrets, and Mia clutched the logbook tighter, her mind racing. Ben's fate, and their own, lay ahead, hidden in the mist, and the Husky's howl had led them straight into its heart. The fog over Blackwater Cove thickened into a living wall, its gray tendrils weaving through the air like threads of a shroud, muffling the world beyond the skiff's bow. Mia Hale stood at the edge, her hands gripping the rail, her eyes straining to pierce the mist where the shadow had vanished. A sharp, fleeting shape that darted north past the Coast Guard cutter's lights. The sea beneath churned with a restless fury, its waves slapping the hull in a rhythm that matched her racing pulse. Storm pressed against her leg, his rugged husky frame bristling, his ice-blue eyes locked on the same invisible point. His growl rumbled deep, a primal sound that shivered through the damp planks and into her bones, a call to action she couldn't ignore. Jack Rollins hunched over the wheel, his gray gaze flicking between the compass and the fog, his oilskin coat glistening with mist. The skiff's motor coughed and sputtered, pushing them deeper into the shoals where the water darkened to an inky black, its surface rippling with unseen currents. "That wasn't no fishing boat," he muttered, his voice rough as the sea itself, laced with a tension that hadn't been there before. Too fast, too quiet, like it didn't want to be seen. Mia clutched the logbook tighter, its sodden pages a lifeline to Ben Carver's fate. The words, shadow boats, no lights, echoing in her mind. "Pirates," she said, the certainty settling like a stone in her gut. Ben wrote about them, cutting nets, stalking the cove. They've been here all along. Storm barked, sharp and commanding, his muzzle aimed at the north, his ears flat against his head. The sound cut through the fog, a dagger in the haze, and Mia felt it. A surge of purpose, a tether to the fisherman who'd raised this dog from a pup. She knelt beside him, her hand sinking into his wet fur, and met his gaze, fierce and unyielding. "You saw them, didn't you?" she whispered, her breath clouding in the chill. "You know where they went." Storm's tail thumped once, a flicker of agreement, and she rose, her resolve hardening like steel forged in the storm's fire. "Jack, follow him," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "He's our guide." The harbormaster's jaw tightened, his skepticism warring with the evidence piling up, the logbook, the wreck, the shadow in the mist. "You're betting our lives on a dog," he said, but his hands were already turning the wheel, steering the skiff north where Storm pointed. The Coast Guard cutter's lights faded behind them, its hum swallowed by the fog, and the world shrank to the three of them, Mia, Jack, and the Husky, whose loyalty burned brighter than any beacon. The shoals loomed closer, jagged rocks breaching the waves like teeth, and the air grew heavier, salt and menace thick on the tongue. Mia flipped open the logbook, her flashlight beam trembling as it swept the pages. Ben's scrawl blurred in the damp, but the coordinates stood out. North Shoals, precise and haunting, marked with a shaky danger beside them. "This is it," she said, her voice rising over the motor's growl. "Where he last fished, where he saw them." Jack's eyes narrowed, his grip on the wheel whitening his knuckles. "If they're pirates, they're armed," he warned. "We're a skiff, not a warship. What's the plan if they spot us?" Mia's mind raced, the seas roar a drumbeat in her ears. "We find Ben," she said. "That's the plan. Storm's not wrong. He's never been wrong." The skiff jolted as a wave crashed against the hull, spraying icy water across the deck. Storm surged forward, his growl deepening, his body taut as he leaned over the bow, sniffing the air. Mia followed his gaze, her heart thudding against her ribs, and saw it. A flicker in the fog, a silhouette sharper than the rocks, moving fast. "There!" she shouted, pointing north. Jack cursed under his breath, throttling the motor, and the skiff lurched after it, cutting through the waves with a desperate speed. The shadow grew clearer, a sleek boat, no lights, its hull painted black to blend with the night, darting between the shoals like a predator on the hunt. Storm's bark erupted, a fierce challenge that echoed off the cliffs, and the shadow boat veered sharply, its engine roaring as it accelerated. "They've seen us," Jack growled, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Hold on, Hale." The skiff rocked violently, the chase igniting in earnest, and Mia gripped the rail, her eyes locked on the fleeing craft. The logbook slipped in her hands, its pages flapping in the wind, but she held fast, the words, "no accident," searing her mind. Ben hadn't drowned, he'd been taken, and this boat was proof. The fog pulsed around them, alive with danger, and Storm's growl became a roar, a husky's defiance against the sea's thieves. The cutter's lights were a distant memory now, the shoals a labyrinth of rock and wave, and the shadow boat wove through it with a skill that spoke of practice, of menace. Mia's breath came in sharp bursts, the cold biting her lungs, but she felt Storm's heat beside her, his loyalty a fire that wouldn't fade. "We're close," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Ben's out there, I know it." Jack nodded, his face grim, and pushed the skiff harder, the motor screaming in protest. The chase was on, the sea a battlefield, and the Husky's howl had led them straight into its heart, a heart that beat with secrets, danger, and the faint, flickering hope of a fisherman's survival. The skiff sliced through the fog like a blade through flesh, its hull shuddering as waves crashed against the bow, spraying icy salt across Mia Hale's face. The North Shoals loomed around them, jagged rocks piercing the sea's surface like the teeth of some ancient beast, their edges blurred by the mist that clung to Blackwater Cove. The shadow boat darted ahead, a sleek black predator weaving through the labyrinth with a precision that chilled her blood. Its engine roared, a guttural snarl that drowned the skiff's straining motor. And Mia gripped the rail tighter, her knuckles white against the wet wood. Storm stood at the bow, his rugged husky frame braced against the wind, his ice-blue eyes blazing as he barked. A fierce, relentless challenge that echoed off the cliffs and into the night. Jack Rollins wrestled the wheel, his gray eyes narrowed to slits, his oilskin coat flapping as he pushed the skiff to its limits. "They're pulling away!" he shouted over the chaos, his voice raw with strain. The shadow boat veered sharply around a shoal, its wake churning the water into a frothy white, and Mia's heart sank as the distance grew. "We can't lose them!" she yelled back, her words nearly swallowed by the wind's howl. The logbook lay wedged against her side, its pages flapping wildly, Ben Carver's scrawl. "They're watching!" Nets cut. A haunting refrain in her mind. This wasn't just a chase, it was a race to Ben, to the truth. And Storm's every bark drove that home. The husky lunged forward, his claws scraping the deck as he leaned over the edge, his growl deepening into a roar that vibrated through the skiff. His ears flattened, his tail stiff, and Mia saw it. A flash of movement on the shadow boat's stern, a figure in dark gear turning to face them. "Jack, they're..." Her warning cut off as a sharp crack split the air, a gunshot ringing out from the fleeing craft. The bullet whizzed past, splintering the rail inches from her hand, and she ducked, her pulse hammering in her throat. "They're shooting!" Jack snarled, yanking the wheel to swerve, the skiff tilting dangerously as water sloshed over the side. Storm didn't flinch. His bark erupted again, louder, fiercer, a defiance that seemed to shake the fog itself, and Mia felt a surge of awe, of fear, of something unbreakable tying her to this dog. "He's not backing down," she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline as she scrambled to her feet. "Neither are we." Jack's face hardened, his skepticism long gone, replaced by a grim resolve. "Damn fools," he muttered, throttling the motor harder, the skiff lurching forward through the waves. "They think they can scare us off? Not with that mutt calling the shots." The shadow boat twisted through the shoals, its speed a taunt, but Mia spotted a flicker. A second figure on deck, hauling something heavy, metallic. "They're armed, more than guns," she said, her breath sharp and cold. "We're in over our heads." Jack's eyes flicked to her, then to Storm, who stood like a sentinel, his fur bristling in the wind. "We've got no choice," he growled. "Ben's out there. Your call, Hale." Mia nodded, her mind racing, and pointed ahead. "Stay on 'em. They're leading us somewhere, maybe to him." The sea roared louder, the fog pulsing with a life of its own, and the shadow boat banked hard, disappearing behind a towering shoal. Jack cursed, steering after it, the skiff rocking as it grazed a rock, the hull groaning in protest. Mia held her breath, her eyes locked on the mist, and then it emerged. The black craft slowing, its wake calming as it approached a jagged outcrop jutting from the waves. "They're stopping," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the surf. Storm's growl softened, his ears pricking, and she saw it. A faint light flickering on the outcrop, a signal in the dark. The skiff closed in, the shadow boat idling now, its crew shadowy figures against the hull. Mia's flashlight swept the scene, catching glints of steel, guns, knives, a coiled net, and her stomach twisted. "Pirates," she said, the word a hiss of realization. "They've got a base here." Jack cut the motor, the skiff drifting in the sudden silence, and the fog seemed to tighten, the cliffs looming like silent judges. Storm's tail thumped once, his eyes never leaving the outcrop, and Mia felt his trust, his certainty, a lifeline in the chaos. A voice barked from the shadow boat, rough and guttural, its words lost to the wind, but the intent was clear: warning, threat, defiance. Another gunshot cracked, this one skimming the water near the skiff, and Jack flinched, his hand hovering over the radio. "We're sitting ducks," he said, his tone tight. "Coast Guard's too far, they won't make it." Mia's mind spun, the logbook's weight a reminder of Ben's words, of Storm's howls. "We don't run," she said, her voice rising over the waves. "Not now, not when we're this close. The shadow boat's engine revved, a low rumble that shook the air, and Mia saw the figures move 3, maybe 4, their silhouettes bristling with intent. Storm surged to the bow, his bark a thunderclap, and the light on the outcrop flickered again, brighter, closer. Her heart leapt, a wild hope igniting in her chest. "That's no signal," she said, her voice trembling with sudden clarity. "That's Ben." Jack's eyes widened, his hand freezing on the wheel, and the skiff drifted nearer. The pirate's boat a dark sentinel between them and the truth. The sea growled, the fog pulsed, and Storm's howl rose once more. A call to fight, to find, to finish what they'd started. The fog over Blackwater Cove coiled tighter, a gray serpent wrapping the north shoals in its grip, muffling the world to a heartbeat of waves and wind. Mia Hale stood at the skiff's bow, her flashlight beam slicing through the mist, its light catching the jagged outcrop where the flicker pulsed, a faint, desperate glow that felt like Ben Carver's voice calling through the dark. The shadow boat loomed between them, its black hull a silent predator idling in the water, its engine's low growl a threat that vibrated through the air. Storm pressed against her, his rugged husky frame trembling with anticipation, his ice-blue eyes locked on the outcrop, his growl a steady rumble that anchored her in the chaos. Jack Rollins crouched beside the wheel, his gray eyes darting between the pirates and the skiff's radio, his oilskin coat slick with spray. "That lights him, you think?" he whispered, his voice rough with hope and dread. "Ben?" Mia nodded, her throat tight, her fingers clutching the logbook like a talisman. "It's got to be," she said, her words barely audible over the surf's restless crash. "He's alive, and they've got him there." The shadow boat's crew, 3 figures, dark-clad and bristling with steel, shifted on deck, their movements sharp, deliberate, a coiled threat ready to strike. Storm barked, a thunderous challenge that rolled across the waves, his ears flat, his tail stiff as he leaned forward, every muscle taut. The sound jolted the pirates, one spinning to face them, a rifle glinting in his hands. "Shut that mutt up," he snarled, his voice cutting through the fog, guttural and thick with menace. The rifle swung toward the skiff, its barrel a cold eye in the mist, and Mia's heart leapt into her throat. "Storm, down!" she hissed, her hand sinking into his fur, pulling him back. The husky resisted, his growl deepening, but he obeyed, crouching low, his eyes never leaving the outcrop. Jack's hand hovered over the radio, his breath sharp. "We're outnumbered," he muttered, his tone tight with urgency. "One call, and the cutter's here in 20. But we might not have 20. Mia's mind raced, the light flickering brighter now, a beacon in the haze. "We can't wait," she said, her voice rising over the wind. "He's right there, close enough to see us. We move now." The pirates shouted again, their words lost to the surf, but the rifle's crack split the air, a bullet skimming the water inches from the skiff's hull. Jack flinched, cursing under his breath, and Mia ducked, her pulse hammering. The shadow boat revved, its engine snarling as it edged closer to the outcrop, its crew scrambling, 2 at the helm, 1 aiming the rifle. Mia's flashlight swept the scene, catching glints of steel, knives, a net, a coiled rope, and then, on the outcrop, a shape. A man slumped against the rock, his hands bound, his face shadowed but unmistakable. "Ben!" she gasped, the name tearing from her lips, a cry that mingled with Storm's howl. The husky surged to his feet, his bark a roar of recognition, and the figure stirred, his head lifting, the light, a lantern, swaying in his grip. "He's alive," Jack said, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and fury. "Those bastards, they've got him tied up!" The pirates reacted, the rifleman firing again, this shot splintering the skiff's rail, wood shards flying like shrapnel. Mia ducked, shielding Storm, her mind spinning with desperation and resolve. "We've got to get to him," she said, her voice fierce despite the fear clawing her chest. "They're not taking him. Not again." Jack nodded, his hand slamming the throttle, the skiff lurching forward through the waves, closing the gap. The shadow boat turned, its hull cutting a sharp arc, blocking their path to the outcrop. The rifleman steadied his aim, his silhouette a dark specter against the fog, and Mia saw the second figure hurl something. A net, weighted and wide, crashing into the water ahead of the skiff. "They're trapping us," Jack shouted, yanking the wheel to avoid it, the skiff tilting dangerously as water sloshed over the side. Storm barked again, his voice a clarion call, and Mia felt his heat, his courage. a fire that burned through the cold. "Keep going," she yelled, her eyes locked on Ben, his lantern a lifeline in the mist. The pirate's boat loomed closer, its engine a guttural roar, and the third figure emerged. A burly man with a scarred face, a pistol in his hand, his grin a slash of menace. "Turn back!" he bellowed, his voice carrying over the waves. "Or your fish food!" The pistol fired. A flash in the fog, and the bullet grazed the skiff's hull, a sharp clang ringing out. Jack swerved, his face pale but set, and Mia gripped the rail, her breath sharp and cold. "They're scared," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "They know we've seen too much." Storm's howl rose again, a sound that shook the air, and Ben's lantern flared brighter, a desperate signal from the rock. Mia's heart thudded, a drumbeat of hope and fury, and she met Jack's gaze, a silent pact forming between them. "We're not turning back," she said, her words a vow etched in the wind. "Not with Storm leading us, not with Ben right there." The skiff surged forward, the pirates closing in, and the fog pulsed around them, alive with danger and the promise of a fight. The sea roared, the cliffs watched, and the Husky's howl became their battle cry, a cry for justice, for truth, for a fisherman stolen by the night. The fog over Blackwater Cove swirled like a living beast, its gray coils tightening around the north shoals as the skiff rocked violently in the churning waves. Mia Hale clung to the rail, her flashlight beam trembling as it locked on Ben Carver, slumped against the outcrop's jagged rock, his lantern swaying in his bound hands. His face, bruised, shadowed, but alive, stared back through the mist, a flicker of hope in his weary eyes. The shadow boat loomed between them, its black hull cutting through the water, its crew a trio of dark specters bristling with menace. Storm stood at the skiff's bow, his rugged husky frame a pillar of defiance, his ice blue eyes blazing as his howl tore through the night, a sound that shook the sea itself. Jack Rollins wrestled the wheel, his gray eyes wide with adrenaline, his oilskin coat drenched as he swerved to dodge the weighted net still trailing in the waves. "They're blocking us!" he shouted, his voice raw over the engine's scream. The pirate's boat surged closer, its engine a guttural roar, the scarred man with the pistol barking orders as the rifleman steadied his aim. A shot cracked, the bullet skimming the skiff's hull with a metallic screech, and Mia ducked, her pulse hammering in her throat. "We're too exposed!" Jack yelled, his hands white-knuckled on the controls. "We can't get past him!" Storm's bark erupted, a thunderclap of fury, and Mia saw it. A shift in the Husky's stance, his muscles coiling like a spring. "Storm, no!" she started. But he was already moving, his claws scraping the deck as he leapt from the skiff's bow, a blur of fur and fang arcing through the fog. Time slowed, the world narrowing to that moment. Storm airborne, his howl a battle cry, his body crashing onto the shadow boat's deck with a thud that silenced the pirates' shouts. The rifleman stumbled, his weapon clattering as Storm's jaws snapped at his legs, and the scarred man spun, his pistol swinging toward the Husky. "Storm!" Mia screamed, her voice tearing from her chest, raw with fear and awe. The pirates flailed, the rifleman kicking at Storm as the dog dodged, his growls a relentless storm of their own. Ben's lantern flared brighter, his head lifting higher, and Mia saw his lips move. "Storm, boy!" A hoarse cry that fueled the Husky's fury. Jack seized the chance, throttling the skiff forward, the hull slicing through the waves as the shadow boat rocked under Storm's assault. "He's given us an opening," Jack roared, steering hard toward the outcrop, the gap narrowing with every heartbeat. The scarred man fired, the pistols flash a streak in the mist, but Storm darted aside, his agility a blur, and the bullet buried itself in the deck. The third pirate, a wiry figure with a knife, lunged at the Husky, blade glinting, and Mia's breath caught, her hands gripping the rail so tight her fingers ached. "Get to Ben!" she yelled, her voice a whip crack over the chaos. The skiff closed in, the outcrop's rocks looming sharp and close, and Jack cut the motor, letting momentum carry them to the edge. Mia leapt onto the rock, her boots slipping on wet stone, her flashlight tumbling as she scrambled toward Ben. "Ben!" she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands tearing at the ropes binding his wrists. His skin was cold, his face gaunt, but his eyes burned with a fire that matched Storm's. "Mia!" he rasped, his voice cracked but alive. They They took me. Pirates. She nodded, her throat tight, her fingers fumbling with the knots. We know. Storm led us. Hold on. Across the water, the shadow boat tilted. Storm's snarls a symphony of chaos as he pinned the rifleman, the scarred man shouting curses, his pistol wavering. Jack vaulted onto the outcrop, his heavy frame steadying Mia as he drew a knife from his belt, slicing through the ropes with a single cut. Up, Carver, he barked, hauling Ben to his feet, the fisherman swaying but standing, his lantern clattering to the rock. The shadow boat's engine revved, a desperate roar, and Mia spun, her heart lurching as the wiry pirate grabbed Storm by the scruff, the knife flashing toward his flank. No! She cried, lunging toward the edge, but Ben gripped her arm, his voice weak but firm. He'll make it, he always does. Storm twisted, his jaws clamping onto the pirate's wrist, the knife skittering across the deck as the man howled in pain. The scarred man fired again, the shot wild, and the shadow boat veered, its crew scrambling to regain control. Jack dragged Ben toward the skiff, Mia supporting his other side, her eyes locked on Storm as the Husky leapt free, diving into the waves with a splash that echoed through the fog. Swim, boy, Ben rasped, his voice breaking, and Mia held her breath, the sea swallowing Storm's form. The skiff rocked as they climbed aboard, Ben collapsing against the rail, his breaths ragged but alive. The shadow boat pulled away, its engines snarling as it fled into the mist, the pirates' shouts fading into the night. Mia scanned the waves, her chest tight, until a wet head broke the surface. Storm, paddling hard, his ice-blue eyes glinting with triumph. There, she cried, reaching over the side, her hands hauling him aboard, his fur soaking her as he shook himself dry. Ben's hand found Storm's head, a trembling touch, and the Husky licked his face, a whine of relief escaping his throat. The fog pulsed around them, the shoals silent now, the light of Ben's lantern extinguished on the rock. Jack restarted the motor, his face grim but steady, and the skiff turned back toward the cove, the pirate's boat a vanishing shadow. They're running, he said, his voice low, but they'll be back. Mia met Ben's gaze, his bruised face etched with gratitude, and Storm pressed close, his warmth a lifeline. The sea growled, the cliffs watched, and the Husky's howl had won. For now. Part 11. Whispers of the Saved. The fog over Blackwater Cove began to thin as the skiff cut through the waves, its motor a steady hum beneath the fading roar of the sea. The north shoals receded into the mist, their jagged rocks swallowed by the gray haze, leaving only the echo of gunfire and Storm's howls in their wake. Mia Hale sat beside Ben Carver, her hands steadying him against the rail, his bruised frame trembling with exhaustion but alive against all odds. Storm sprawled across his lap, his rugged husky fur dripping seawater onto the deck, his ice-blue eyes half-closed but vigilant, a guardian resting after battle. The lantern's light was gone, left on the outcrop, but its memory burned in Mia's chest, a beacon that had led them through the dark. Jack Rollins steered with a quiet focus, his gray eyes scanning the horizon where the shadow boat had vanished, his oilskin coat stiff with salt and strain. The skiff rocked gently now, the storm's fury spent, and the cliffs of the cove emerged through the lifting fog, their rugged faces a silent welcome home. They're gone, Jack said, his voice rough but laced with a weary triumph. For now. Mia nodded, her gaze drifting to Ben, whose head rested against the rail, his breath shallow but steady. We got him back, she said, her words a soft anchor in the stillness. That's what matters. Storm shifted, his muzzle nudging Ben's hand, and the fisherman stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Hazel, clouded with pain but sharp with recognition. Storm, he rasped, his voice cracked from days of silence, his fingers tangling in the husky's wet fur. Knew you'd find me, boy. The dog whined, a soft sound of relief, and Mia felt a lump rise in her throat, the bond between them a thread of loyalty that had defied the sea's grasp. She leaned closer, her voice gentle but urgent. Ben, what happened? Who were they? He coughed, a rattling sound that shook his frame, and Jack tossed her a blanket from the skiff's hold, his movements brisk but careful. She draped it over Ben's shoulders, her hands lingering as he gathered his strength. Pirates, he said at last, his words halting, each one a weight pulled from the deep. Been hitting us for months, cutting nets, stole catches, threatened us quiet. I saw him, 3 nights back, off the shoals. Shadow boats, no lights, just like the log. Mia's pulse quickened, the logbook's scrawl flashing in her mind. They're watching. No accident. You wrote it down, she said, her voice steady. You knew. Ben nodded, his gaze distant, lost in the memory. Tried to warn the others, Pete, the co-op, but they didn't believe me. Thought I was seeing ghosts. Then they came for me, night of the storm. Dragged me off the salty dawn, sank my gear, left the boat to drift. His hand tightened in Storm's fur, his voice breaking. Storm fought him, bit one good. But they kicked him off, locked me on that rock. Said they'd come back to finish it. Mia's stomach twisted, a cold fury simmering beneath her relief. They staged it, she said, her tone sharp. Made it look like you drowned. Jack's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he guided the skiff toward the docks, their warped planks now visible through the thinning fog. Bastards, he muttered, his voice low and lethal. Been preying on us all this time, right under our noses. He glanced at Ben, his skepticism long drowned in the shoals. Why you, Carver? Why not just take the catch and run? Ben's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze flickering to the sea. I saw their faces, he said. One of them, scarred, big guy. I'd seen him before. At the docks, weeks back, hauling crates with no labels. They knew I'd talk. Mia's mind raced, piecing it together. The logbook, the wreck of the Gull's Cry, the shadow boats weaving through the cove. They're organized, she said, her voice rising over the motor's hum. Not just thieves, smugglers, maybe worse. That wreck we found, it's part of this, isn't it? Ben nodded, slow and grim. Heard him talking on the rock. Said the cove's been theirs since '09. Gull's Cry was there first. Sank it to scare us off, keep the waters theirs. The skiff bumped against the dock, its hull creaking as Jack tied it off, his movement swift despite the weight of Ben's words. The cove's air was lighter now, the fog lifting to reveal the cliff's rugged embrace, but a shadow lingered. Not in the mist, but in the truth unfolding before them. Mia helped Ben stand, his arms slung over her shoulder, Storm leaping to the planks beside them, his tail wagging faintly but his ears pricked for danger. They'll come back, Ben said, his voice a hoarse whisper as he leaned on her. They don't let loose ends live. Jack grabbed the radio, his fingers trembling slightly as he keyed it up. Coast Guard, this is Rollins. Got Carver, alive, North Shoals. Pirates hit us, armed and running. Need backup now. The static crackled, a voice promising swift response, and Jack met Mia's gaze, a silent pact forged in the night's fire. We're not done, he said, his tone grim. They've got a base out there, shoals, wrecks, who knows what else. Mia nodded, her resolve a steel thread through the exhaustion creeping in. We'll find it, she said. For Ben, for all of them they've taken. Storm pressed close, his warmth a steady pulse against her leg, and she felt his trust, his courage, a lifeline that had pulled them through the storm. The dock stretched ahead, the town waking to a new day, its lights flickering through the haze. But the sea growled beyond, a restless beast with secrets still to spill, and Mia knew the fight wasn't over. The pirates had fled, but their shadow lingered, a promise of vengeance in the waves, and Storm's howl had only begun to unravel it. The fog over Blackwater Cove lifted like a curtain rising on a bruised dawn, its gray veil peeling back to reveal the cliff's rugged faces and the sea's restless shimmer. Mia Hale stood on the dock, her boots planted firm against the warped planks, Ben Carver leaning heavily on her shoulder, his breath shallow but steady. Storm pressed against her leg, his rugged husky fur still damp, his ice-blue eyes scanning the horizon where the shadow boat had vanished into the shoal's embrace. The skiff bobbed beside them, its hull scarred from the chase, a silent witness to the night's fury. The air carried a crisp bite, salt and pine, mingling with the faint hum of the town stirring awake, unaware of the battle fought in its waters. Jack Rollins clipped the radio to his belt, his gray eyes sharp as he waved down the Coast Guard cutter, slicing through the waves, its lights pulsing red and blue through the thinning mist. The vessel loomed larger, its steel hull a stark contrast to the skiff's weathered wood, its crew bustling on deck with a precision that spoke of readiness. They're here, Jack said, his voice rough but steady, a thread of relief woven through the exhaustion. Took 'em long enough. Mia nodded, her gaze flicking to Ben, whose bruised face tightened with a mix of gratitude and dread. They need to know everything, she said, her tone firm. The pirates, the shoals, the wrecks, it's bigger than we thought. The cutter docked with a groan of metal, its gangway clanking down as a tall officer, Lieutenant Hayes, his uniform crisp despite the hour, strode toward them, his dark eyes assessing the trio and the Husky at their feet. Rollins, report, he barked, his voice clipped, authoritative. Jack stepped forward, his oilskin coat dripping as he gestured to Ben. Carver's alive, nabbed by pirates off the North Shoals, armed, organized, running a shadow boat. We chased him off, but they've got a base out there. Been hitting our fishermen for months, maybe years. Hayes' brow furrowed, his gaze shifting to Ben, then to Storm, who growled low, a warning etched in fur and fang. Mia handed over the logbook, its pages swollen but legible, and Hayes flipped it open, his eyes narrowing at Ben's scrawl. Shadow boats, no lights, nets gone by dawn. This true? He asked, his tone softening slightly as he met Ben's weary gaze. The fisherman nodded, his voice hoarse but clear. Saw him myself 3 nights back. They took me, staged the boat to look like I drowned. Said the cove's theirs, since '09 when they sank the Gull's Cry. Hayes' jaw tightened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. That wreck, he muttered. We wrote it off as a storm loss. You're saying it's tied to this? More than tied, Mia said, her voice rising over the wave's restless slap. It's their start. Scared the town off these waters, kept them quiet while they built this network. Smugglers, pirates, whatever they are, they're not done. She pointed to the shoals, their jagged shapes faint in the dawn light. They've got a base out there, and they'll come back for Ben. For us. Storm barked, sharp and insistent, his ears pricked as if echoing her words, and Hayes studied the Husky, a grudging respect in his eyes. Dog's got a nose for it, he said, almost to himself, then turned to his crew. Get Carver to the medic, full debrief. We're sweeping the shoals now. The dock creaked as townsfolk gathered, drawn by the cutter's lights and the skiff's return. Old Pete with his thermos, the dock workers in their oilskins, a handful of kids peering from behind their parents. Whispers rippled through them, eyes widening as they spotted Ben, alive and leaning on Mia. He's back? Pete rasped, limping closer, his voice thick with disbelief. Thought the sea took him. Mia met his gaze, her resolve a steel thread through the exhaustion. It didn't, she said. Storm wouldn't let it, and neither would we. Ben straightened, his hand buried in Storm's fur, drawing strength from the Husky's warmth. They're thieves, he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, his voice cracking but firm. Been stealing from us. Nets, fish, lives. I saw 'em, and they tried to shut me up. The townsfolk murmured, shock turning to anger, their faces hardening as the truth sank in. A woman, Mrs. Tate, the co-op's bookkeeper, pushed forward, her scarf fluttering. My boy lost his catch last month, she said, her tone sharp. Said it was a storm, but the nets were cut clean. You're saying it's them? Ben nodded, grim. It's all of us. They've been bleeding this cove dry. Hayes signaled his crew, medics rushing to Ben with a stretcher, but he waved them off, standing taller despite the pain. I'll walk, he rasped, Storm at his side, a loyal shadow. Mia followed, her mind racing as the cutter's engines revved, its lights cutting through the dawn. We need to hit him hard, she said to Hayes, her voice low but fierce, before they regroup. The lieutenant nodded, his expression grim. We will. Full sweep, armed patrol. But we need more. Coordinates. Patterns. You've got that dog? Use him. The crowd parted, their whispers growing into a swell of resolve, and Mia felt the cove shift. Blackwater waking to a fight it hadn't known it faced. The sea stretched beyond, its waves calmer now, but a shadow lingered in the shoals, a promise of vengeance yet to come. Jack clapped her shoulder, his grip steady. You started this, Hale, he said, his tone gruff but warm. Storm and you. Damn near saved us all. She met his gaze, then Storm's, the Husky's tail wagging faintly, his trust a lifeline through the storm's aftermath. The cutter pulled away, its wake rippling the water, and Mia watched it go, the logbook's weight a reminder of the battle ahead. The town's lights flickered brighter, the cliff standing sentinel, and Storm's growl softened, a quiet vow etched in the dawn. The pirates had fled, but their grip on the cove wasn't broken. Not yet. Mia tightened her fists, her breath clouding in the crisp air, and knew the Husky's howl had stirred a reckoning, and Blackwater was ready to answer. The dawn broke over Blackwater Cove with a fierce clarity. The fog burned away by a sun that streaked the sky with gold and fire, casting long shadows across the restless sea. Mia Hale stood on the Coast Guard cutter's deck, her hands gripping the rail, the wind tugging at her damp hair as the vessel sliced through the waves toward the North Shoals. Ben Carver sat beside her, a blanket draped over his shoulders, his bruised face set with a quiet resolve, his hand buried in Storm's fur. The rugged Husky leaned into him, his ice-blue eyes glinting with a steady calm, his tail wagging faintly as the cutter's engines roared, a warship charging into battle. The cove stretched behind them, its cliffs standing tall, the town's lights a distant glow of hope, reborn. Jack Rollins flanked the helm with Lieutenant Hayes, his gray eyes sharp as he pointed out coordinates from Ben's logbook, his oilskin coat traded for a Coast Guard vest. The cutter bristled with armed crew, rifles glinting in the morning light, their faces grim with purpose. "They're out there," Jack said, his voice rough but steady, cutting through the wind's howl. "Shoals are their nest, won't go down without a fight." Hayes nodded, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. "We've got 2 boats on radar. Shadowcraft, no signals. Closing fast." Mia's pulse quickened, her gaze locking on the shoals, their jagged rocks breaching the waves like a fortress waiting to be stormed. Storm rose, his ears pricking, his growl a low rumble that vibrated through the deck, and Mia felt it, a shift in the air, a promise of reckoning. "He knows," she said, her voice firm over the engine's drone. "They're coming." Ben gripped her arm, his touch weak but urgent. "They'll fight dirty," he rasped. "Took me 'cause I saw too much. Won't let this go easy." She met his gaze, then Storm's, and nodded, her resolve a steel thread through the dawn's fire. "Neither will we," she said, her words a vow etched in salt and wind. The shadow boats burst from the mist, their black hulls slicing through the waves, engines snarling as they charged the cutter. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks splitting the air, bullets pinging off the steel deck as the crew returned fire, their rifles a thunderous reply. Mia ducked behind a bulkhead, Storm crouching beside her, his growl deepening into a roar as the pirates closed in. The scarred man stood at the helm of the lead boat, his pistol flashing, his grin a slash of defiance, while the wiry knife wielder manned a net launcher, its coils glinting with menace. "Hold steady," Hayes shouted, his voice a whip crack over the chaos, the cutter veering to flank them. Storm surged forward, his claws scraping the deck, and Mia grabbed his scruff, her heart lurching. "Stay, boy," she yelled, but his eyes burned with a fire she couldn't hold, a loyalty that wouldn't bend. The cutter rocked as a net crashed against its side, tangling the rail, and the scarred man fired again, a bullet grazing Hayes' shoulder. The lieutenant grunted, staggering, and Jack leapt to the helm, his hands steady as he pushed the cutter harder, closing the gap. "We've got him!" he roared, the vessel's wake churning white as it bore down on the lead boat. The pirates faltered, their formation breaking, and Storm seized the moment. Leaping from the deck, a blur of fur and fang arcing through the air, landing on the shadow boat's stern. His jaws snapped at the scarred man, teeth sinking into his arm, the pistol clattering to the deck as he howled in pain. The wiry pirate swung his knife, but Storm dodged, his agility a storm of its own, and the crew fired again, a barrage that splintered the shadow boat's hull. "Now!" Mia shouted, her voice rising over the gunfire, and Hayes rallied, his crew pinning the second boat with precision shots. The scarred man kicked at Storm, his face twisting with rage, but the Husky held fast, his growl a thunderclap that shook the pirate's resolve. The lead boat tilted, its engine sputtering as water flooded in, and the wiry pirate leapt to the second craft, dragging his wounded leader aboard. "Fall back!" he yelled, his voice cracking, but the cutter surged forward, its steel prow ramming the fleeing boat with a bone-shaking crunch. The pirate's craft buckled, its hull splitting, and the crew swarmed aboard, cuffs snapping on wrists as the scarred man slumped. Defeated, his sneer drowned in the waves. Storm leapt back to the cutter, his fur soaked, his tail wagging as he landed beside Ben, who pulled him close, tears streaking his bruised face. "Good boy," he rasped, his voice breaking, and Mia knelt beside them, her hands trembling as she hugged the husky, his warmth a lifeline through the battle's end. The sea calmed, its waves lapping softer now, and the shoals stood silent, their secrets spilled in the dawn's light. Hayes clapped Jack's shoulder, his wound bandaged, his tone steady. "Cove's ours again," he said, and Jack nodded, his face etched with pride. The cutter turned home, the town's docks growing closer, a crowd gathering, Pete, Mrs. Tate, the kids, cheering as they spotted Ben, alive and whole. Mia stood, Storm at her side, and felt the weight lift, the cove reborn in the sun's embrace. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but firm, and Ben smiled, weak but real. "Storm did," he said, and the husky barked, a joyful sound that echoed through the cliffs. And that's the tale of Storm, a dog whose howl defied the dark, leading Mia, Jack, and a town to reclaim their sea. From a stormy night to a golden dawn, his loyalty turned tragedy into triumph. Thanks for sailing with us. If Storm's courage moved you, drop a comment. Could your dog be this brave? What would you fight for? Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories of heart and heroism. Until next time, keep the bonds that guide us strong.